Hi, this is Vaughn with Spirit of Health. In this video, we are going to show you how to make meat stock. Now this is found in page 145 of the GAPS book in detail. It's also on my website, spiritofhealthkc.com, and in the Internal Bliss cookbook as well. This is the absolute foundation behind the GAPS diet. So this is a really important recipe for you to know how to make, because this is going to be something you're going to use throughout the GAPS diet, even as you add in other foods. So it's really critical you know how to make a good bone broth soup. So first we're just going to start with making the meat stock. Now if it's the first time you've done this or you're new to the GAPS diet, just keep it really simple. I'm going to give you some variations that you can do, but we just want to make sure that you just keep it simple in the beginning, because making this soup, it might seem daunting if you've never done it before, but it's very simple. Bone broth soups is something that has been consumed around the world for thousands of years. Almost every culture around the world ate soups. Even if you go back in America, not that long ago, a couple generations ago, and this was a regular staple of the diet. So let's get started. The first thing we have here is we just have a basic crock pot. And you can also use a soup pot as well, because you can use the stove to make it, but we got our crock pot here. I'm going to tell you how to do each. But the first thing you want to do is you're just going to add the water here, and I got a gallon of water. That's about standard for a regular sized crock pot. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to add our bone. Now when it comes to bones, you have a lot of different options. You can use any type of animal bone. You can use fish, you can use beef, you could use goat or lamb, you can use any bird, you could use chicken, it could be duck, just any type of bone. Now, the most healing bones are going to be the ones, for the gut anyway, are going to be the bones with the marrow. So beef bones with a lot of marrow is going to be extremely healing for this GAPS diet. Any of the joints, the knuckles, ligaments, all of those are great. Actually, when it comes to healing bones, joints, and ligaments, the chicken bones are really good. People spend a lot of money buying supplements that contain hyaluronic acid, glucosamine, chondroitin. Where are these naturally found? They're found in bones, joints, ligaments, tissues. That's where the supplements are made. So eating bone broth soup, especially chicken soup, is very healing for somebody who has arthritis, who has bad knees, or needs to heal a bone, joint, or ligament. So I just thought I'd mention that. That's really important. What we're going to do for this particular video is we're going to use the beef ribs. Now again, you can use any knuckle or joint or any other type, but we're going to use the beef ribs. So I'm just going to slice this open. Now of course the meat, no antibiotics, no hormones, and even more important to that, 100% grass-fed from a local farmer. We get this from a local farmer that not only is 100% grass-fed, but actually feeds their cattle alfalfa sprouts, and not a drop of soy, corn, nothing genetically modified goes in these animals. And this is very important for the healing part of this diet. So I'm just going to put this whole bone right in there, just like this. Just wash my hands real quick. Now other options, of course, would be like a whole chicken. So here's a whole frying chicken, and same thing, no antibiotics, no hormones, from a local farmer, and you could have just put that whole chicken in there as well. Fish works great as well. Another good option is the pot. So we have a soup pot here, and what you can do is you can put the bone in the soup pot and cover it with water. The only thing with the soup pot is you really want to be careful and watch it, because it can be dangerous. That water can quickly evaporate out of there, and then you could have a problem. So really make sure you're at home and you're watching it if you use the soup pot on the stove. Now with the crock pot, you can just put it on low, and you want to cook it at least overnight. So overnight would be 6 to 8 hours. You can actually cook these bones up to 72 hours. And actually the longer you cook the bone, the more nutrients and minerals that you pull out of those bones that are going to be healing to your digestive tract. So don't worry if you want to let that go 72 hours, that's very beneficial. Now, the meat will be cooked overnight. So within 5 to 6 hours, this meat is going to be cooked. So it's really up to you if you want to pull that meat out and go ahead and have that, and then just cook the bones for 72 hours, or you can just leave the meat on the bone. We actually leave the meat on the bone. We've cooked bones 48, 72 hours all the time. We don't think it's a problem or it causes it to be tough or anything like that. The meat is actually boiled, and boiled meat, because of the water content in it, is actually much, much easier to digest than like fried meat or grilled meat. So it's the best option for you. With the soup pot, that meat's going to be cooked in just a couple of hours, 2 to 3 hours. That soup, that bone, the meat on the bone is going to be cooked. So you can go ahead and, again, you can remove that if you like and feed your family. Another option, just to give you one more option, is you can actually roast the bones first. You just want to roast it long enough to cook the meat. It's usually about an hour or so, it depends on the meat. But you roast it, and you can have the meat for your family meal, and then you can put the bones in a crock pot or the stock pot and fill it with water and go ahead and cook those bones again for 24, 48, 72 hours, whatever works for you. Okay, so now that we got that, what we're going to do is just going to add a couple of basic things in here, and I want to just give you some options. Some basic things that we do is we put just a few peppercorns in there. So these are just basic run-of-the-mill peppercorns, a couple of those, and a little bit of sea salt. You want to make sure you use sea salt. This is Celtic sea salt, not a table salt. So a Himalayan pink salt or some kind of other natural salt of the earth. A little bit of salt. And then another option, this isn't actually talked about in the GAPS recipe, but we learned that apple cider vinegar or some kind of vinegar in the soup is excellent because it'll actually help draw a lot of the nutrients out of the bones. So we usually add just a little bit, maybe like a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar into the bone as well to just help get more nutrients out. One other option actually is to add eggshells into it. I mentioned earlier the hyaluronic acid. It's very high. Eggshells are actually very high in hyaluronic acid. Very good for cushioning the knees and joints, good for arthritis, rebuilding joints and ligaments, cartilage. So if I had some eggshells, which I don't, but you could put those in here, and of course you're not going to eat the eggshell. You're just going to get the nutrients out of the eggshells right into the broth, and then you'll strain those out when you actually go to cook and eat the meat. So wanted to stress too that there's going to be a little bit of meat on your bone, most likely. Now you can get just bones without meat, and that's fine, and you get the marrow in there. But if it doesn't have a lot of meat, that's okay. The meat's not the really critical healing part of the GAPS diet. It's actually the joints and the tissues and the fats. The fat is the real healer of the gut, and the fat helps with hormone balancing and anti-inflammatory, so many benefits. It's how we produce most of our hormones, especially our steroid hormones. So the fats are the healing part, not necessarily focused on the meat. So you don't have to worry about eating a lot of meat. Eating way too much meat can be problematic anyway. So again, the focus is going to be on the fats. What's really neat about that I learned about the GAPS diet that I really like from a biblical perspective, because there's a lot of people out there that aren't into eating meat or even against eating meat. But again, it's something people have eaten all around the world for thousands of years. It's been a main source of sustenance for thousands of years. In Genesis 1:24, God actually says, "Let the earth bring forth creatures after its own kind." So the creatures of the earth, cattle and fish and all these different animals, actually came out of the earth. So in Genesis 2:7, what does it say? Well, the Lord God formed man out of dust. So we actually also come from the earth. So all of the components that animals contain, those nutrients, are the same components that our bodies contain, and therefore those properties that are contained in the bone broth soups is very, very healing for our bodies as well. In ancient cultures, they would actually eat the organ meats of an animal if they had a problem with that organ. So if they had a problem with their liver, they'd eat liver. If they had a problem with their thyroid, they'd eat thyroid, kidneys, etc. So this is something that's been ancient history for a long time, even since biblical times and probably even before that. So once I have this cooked, let's say I have this cooked for 72 hours and we're ready to go, what you want to do is you want to store it. And you can store it in the refrigerator for about 5 to 7 days. That's about as long as it's going to make it in the refrigerator. The other thing you can do is you can store it in the freezer. So I have an example here of one that we had actually stored in the freezer. You can store it in a mason jar. Now, of course, if you put it in there, you'd want to make sure it was cool to at least room temperature before you put it in the freezer to keep it from potentially cracking. And you want to leave at least 2 inches. See, there's about 2 inches there for it to expand, because it will expand a little bit. But this can keep indefinitely in the freezer, and you can just reuse it as needed. So we have our soup made. We have it stored properly. The next thing we do is we make our soup, which we're actually going to show you in the next video. We're going to show you how to make a soup, vegetable soup, using our homemade meat stock, which we showed you how to prepare in the first video. So the first thing we need to do is, now that everything has been cooked, we need to separate the bone out from the soup. So I'm going to take my tongs here, and I'm going to get the bone out of the soup. I'm actually going to put it in this bigger bowl here. And if you don't get every single little piece, that's okay, because we're actually going to pour it through a sieve. So you'll make sure you'll get every little piece. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the meat off of the bone. And there's some marrow inside of these bones. Now, marrow is interesting because marrow is one of the most healing parts of the GAPS diet, if you're following the GAPS diet. And the marrow was used in ancient times. The most prized pieces of meat that they ate at the feasts and the festivals were the pieces of meat that had the most marrow in it. So what you can do to get this marrow out is you can actually kind of hammer it on a hard surface, and see that marrow kind of comes out of there. And you want to get as much of that out as you can, because that's very, very, very healing. So I'm going to just get the rest of this off of here. Here's the meat. Got one more little bone here. Alright, so all the meat is separated out now. I'm just going to kind of tear it into just little bit smaller chunks, just so it'll be easier to eat later. Now I'm just going to wash my hands really quick. Okay, so now we have our meat and our bones separated out. Now what we need to do is we need to pour this stock through a sieve into the pot here. And this is the pot we're going to use to boil our soup here in a few minutes. So I'm just going to pour this into here. And see, there was a couple parts I missed, but that's okay. That's what the sieve's for. Okay, so I got a couple bones in here I don't need, but I got a little more meat, so I'm going to keep that. Get rid of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the meat right back into the soup pot here. Okay. Now, before I actually added that meat back into the soup there, that would have been just the stock without the meat. After I sieved it through, I ran it through the sieve, that would have been the stock. And the stock, just plain, is really good for infants. We actually have a 5.5-month-old daughter, Naomi, and she just started eating meat stock. It's the first food we actually introduced to her to heal her gut lining. It's also very good for people that have really bad diarrhea. So now that I've added the meat back in, and we're going to add some vegetables, now we're going to have the actual soup. So I have a bunch of different vegetables here. And I will just be honest, Jen and I don't necessarily follow a recipe. There are lots of great recipes out there. You don't necessarily need to follow a recipe. I don't know if we've ever even followed a recipe. We just take what we have in our fridge and we put it in the soup, and it always tastes fantastic. So you don't have to follow a specific recipe, but on the Spirit of Health website, the GAPSdiet.com website, the GAPS cookbook, the Internal Bliss cookbook, you have all kinds of resources from which to pull from to actually get some recipes if you want that. But you'll find that just making the soup will taste good just by throwing some things in it. So what I have here is some carrots. I'm going to just throw those in. I'm going to put in some cabbage here. Now let me tell you a little bit about cabbage. If the person who's following the GAPS diet, especially if you're following the GAPS diet, you want to make sure you don't use any really fibrous vegetables, especially in the beginning, because they can promote diarrhea, and they can be issues for a lot of people. So in the beginning, if you know you have diarrhea, or if you even suspect that they could be an issue, it's best not to do fibrous vegetables. Now that would include cabbage, that would include broccoli and cauliflower. You really want to make sure you get the stems cut off of there. But that would also include like Brussels sprouts, kale, really fibrous vegetables. You want to be careful with those in the beginning. But we're going to go ahead and put the cabbage in. We love cabbage in our soup. We love onions in our soup. And I'm also going to go ahead and put some kale in. This is fresh right out of our garden out back. So we love the kale in the soup. It's a great opportunity to put some really nutrient-dense vegetables in the soup, like kale, for example. Not a lot of ways people eat kale, so it's a good way to just throw it in the soup. Herbs are also excellent. These herbs are all right out of our garden. I got some basil here, some oregano, some thyme, some dill, and these are fresh right out of our garden. We don't recommend a lot of spices in the beginning because they can be hard, again, on people's intestinal tracts, especially if they have diarrhea or intestinal issues. So I might just stick with the fresh herbs in the very beginning. Now another thing, we were talking about the nutrient-dense foods, is seaweeds. And we have wakame here, and we have nori here, and there's also one called kombu that we use a lot. And again, a lot of people don't know about these or how to eat these. People might have them when they have sushi. That's what sushi's regularly wrapped in. But they're very nutrient dense. People with thyroid issues, just a way to get a lot of minerals and nutrients into the body is these very nutrient dense seaweeds. So what you can do is you can break them up. A lot of them come in sheets. You just break them up and you just put them in the soups. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just put a little wakame in here. Very, very good stuff. And then all you need to do now is we have our soup pot here full of goodies and ready to cook. So we're going to put it on the stove here. And I'm going to put this on high. And then the one thing that you can do at the end of the, after the soup has been cooked, is you can add some fresh garlic or some fresh ginger. So the garlic, you want to actually press through a garlic press. And then we have ginger here that we have a grater, and we'll just grate some fresh ginger in that. But we usually do that at the end. You can actually do that in the beginning, but at the end we find that it kind of maintains the taste and the flavor of both the garlic and the ginger if you do that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put the lid on our soup here. And we're going to flip it on high, and we're going to bring it to a boil. And then once it's to a boil, we're going to lower it and we're going to simmer it just for about 25 to 30 minutes. Add our garlic and our ginger, and you have your soup. Now, when you're eating your soup, okay, now your soup's prepared, it's done, it's ready. When you're eating your soup, what they recommend, especially in GAPS, if you're following the GAPS protocol again, is adding some fresh, homemade, fermented foods to each bowl of soup. So the first ones you recommend is sauerkraut juice, and we're going to show you in a future video how to make the sauerkraut juice. But sauerkraut juice, whey, yogurt, or sour cream. Those are the initial ones that you would introduce. Usually just 1 to 2 teaspoons per bowl of soup. You can gradually increase it, but you're going to do that to the tolerance level. The final thing that you can do is after the soup is prepared, you can actually put it in a blender and blend it. And a blended soup is really good for people who have trouble chewing food, infants, or older people, or anyone who just has a problem chewing food, and it'll just make it very easy for them to digest if they do it that way. So we hope you enjoyed this video, and we thank you for watching it from our kitchen to yours. This is Vaughn with Spirit of Health, and may this food bless your bodies. I'm going to take a couple of minutes. We're going to do a Q&A, so hopefully you guys wrote down some questions you have. I'm going to look online to see if anybody sent me any questions online, and we'll do about 25-30 minutes of Q&A. Okay, so if anybody online has any questions, you can send it to me in the chat option. I don't actually see any right now. So I'll check it every few minutes. If anybody online wants to send me any questions, just go ahead and do that. And yeah, let's go ahead and start any Q&A. So questions? Yes, Deb?
This was wonderful, by the way, but
Thanks.
I just noticed in here that it didn't appear to have any fat in it. Did you skim the fat?
Nope, we never skim the fat. The fat's the most important part.
That's what, but it didn't taste like
Yeah, it totally depends on the bone.
Okay.
I mean, you'll see some bones. You really have to be a little bit careful. That's a good question because,
it didn't appear like there was any fat at all in that.
like, we've had a couple times where we put the water all the way to the top of the crock pot and we got a real fatty bone in there, and literally the crock pot's like boiling over. And then we have other bones that there's not a lot of fat in it, so it actually barely even boils on low on the crock pot. So the fat really heats up the water, so you got to be careful. But yeah, it totally depends on the bone and what you use. If you just use a cow bone, for example, that's not a soup bone, there's no meat on it, it's just the bone, yeah, there's not really any fat on that.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it just totally depends on the different types of bones. It's going to vary. Yeah, but yeah, the fat is a healing part, so if you can get the fats, the fatty stuff is great. Yeah, we'll talk a whole lot about fats. We don't need to be scared about fats, the right ones anyway.
I was just wondering, do they say anything about the nightshades in this diet?
Not
Do you use any of them, or?
You know what? That's a really, really good question. I don't want to say this for sure. I've read the book, and I'm not saying I didn't miss it because it's a lot of information. I don't know if she addresses that specifically. Most diets do, especially if you have a healing gut or any food allergies, arthritis, pain conditions. People know about nightshades, which are tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes, peppers. What we'll talk about in the future is the GAPS diet is pretty restrictive in the first if you do the introduction diet. You know, you do the bone broth soups, and unless you're putting those nightshades in there, most likely pain conditions and digestive issues and things like that will go away fairly quickly. But as you add foods or you introduce new things, you always pay attention to how you're feeling. So if those foods are an issue for you, you'll know when you introduce them. So we kind of cover that when we introduce new foods. So it's a good question. Anything else? Yes.
This may be a stupid question, but like, say you put a chicken in the crock pot, and you know, the bones and stuff. You know, I'm guessing it's probably not good. You shouldn't eat the bone itself. You know, because after a while it gets fairly, soft. Is it bad or dangerous? Or?
That is a great question. I can't believe you preface this with this might be a dumb question. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's a great question. I mean, oh my gosh, that's such a great question. Yeah, especially when it comes to chicken bones. There's a lot of little bones in there. So you really want to be careful when you're stripping everything off. And you literally want as much of it as you can. You want as much of the edible stuff as you can. So there's going to be little pieces of cartilage and some of the fibrous, chunky stuff, like right on the leg bones and stuff like that. You can totally eat that. The gristle, they say, the gristle, you can eat the gristle. Now what's interesting is the longer you cook the bone, the more the bones are cooked. If you cook a chicken 72 hours and you go to try to pull some stuff out that bone, you'll find if you put a little bit of pressure on that bone, it's going to break, and it's just going to dissolve.
Right.
And that's not going to hurt you.
Okay.
It's.
That's what we had started, you know, and remember you said you cook up to 72 hours. We were like, oh, what the heck?
Yeah.
I was eating it, and I was like, well, you know, the bone just chews up the bread like, you know.
Yeah, it's a great question,
I
man.
said to my wife, I said, you think it's bad to eat the bone? And she was kind of like, no, you can't eat the bone. I was like, well, it's like nothing.
Yeah.
So,
And there's all the nutrition's in there. All the nutrition's in there.
so
Yeah, so there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not encouraging people to, hey, let's grind up all the bones and eat all the bones.
Right.
You know, the key again is the fats.
Right.
But you get a little bit of that in there, yeah, it's
that's
not going to hurt
what I
anything at all.
think. Well,
Yep.
a little extra marrow out of that.
Yeah. So that's a great question. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if I got any questions online. Ooh, is it okay to can bone broth? Janet, thank you. Great question. I have no idea. So I'll have to look into that one. I don't know how you would do that.
You have to process it. You have to put
Hot water.
Probably some kind of preservative in it, or,
You have to pressure it, because anything with meat, it has to be pressured, not just a hot water bath.
okay.
Yeah.
So Deb here is saying that it has to be pressurized, but I might look into that for you, Janet, because it's a good question. I've never thought about that or asked that, been asked that, so,
You can do it. You
Okay.
just have to pressure it.
great. Any other thoughts, questions?
What was in your soup tonight?
Well, here's what's really funny about the soup tonight. You just saw the video.
Oh,
That was it. We did that video yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yeah, yeah. So we want to do all the videos for all the GAP stuff and then put them all on the website. We're going to have a GAPS section, and it's going to list the foods for stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and then it's going to have the videos right there and recipes, and we're going to put all that together. So by the end of the class series, we'll have all that information on the website. So, yeah. Whoever.
Can you compare and contrast? Because when I first started coming, I kind of followed the body ecology diet. So
Mhm.
and then they appeared to be very similar.
Mhm.
So could you maybe give me some, some contrasting things? Between these two?
I'm going to give you a short answer that could potentially be a very long answer. I will tell you for the long answer, you can actually go to Body Ecology's website, and you can look up GAPS diet, and she will list the 10 things, the 10 main differences between the Body Ecology and the GAPS diet. It's kind of like what I talked about before. They both know each other.
Right.
They both incredible amount of respect for the other person.
Right.
Hearts are the same. Let's help tens of thousands of people. They need this information. But there are variances. And one of the big ones that Body Ecology talks about is the GAPS diet doesn't necessarily focus on like candida and bacterial infections. So you have to be really careful when you introduce fruit and sugary things, for example. And so there's some of those kind of differences. But they're both gut healing diets. Body Ecology really, really focuses on the fermented foods, which is great. GAPS diet really focuses on the bone broth soups and the fats and the fermented foods. Body Ecology loves fats, but she didn't really overly emphasize that as the gut healing. Her main emphasis of gut healing is probiotics, fermented foods, probiotics, again, which is great. I chose the GAPS diet because I'm not sure, but I think you can be you can be a Body Ecology practitioner as well. I chose GAPS diet because I seen it work faster and better in people with gut disorders. Body Ecology works too. They both work. But GAPS, I have seen better results, but I like both. And I still recommend Body Ecology diet to people all the time. So, yeah.
So if we want to move a little bit faster, like beyond just the soup, like
Mhm.
this week, where would you recommend what we do?
The
Like the next step?
Well, it's in the book, and then on gapsdiet.com, you click on Introduction Diet, and it'll actually list it all out right there. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3, Stage 4, Stage 5. Stage 2 is very simply cracking an egg, separating the white from the yolk, and adding the yolks into your soup. That's Stage 2. That's all there is to Stage 2.
Okay.
Stage 3, you add avocado. Now there's one other thing, because you're going to add fermented foods to your tolerance. We're going to talk next time about sauerkraut juice, how you can do the whey, how you can do the yogurt, and how to do food sensitivities, how to check for food allergies to see if you're sensitive to those foods as you progress through the program. And we do the same thing with our daughter. We put the food on her body to see if she's allergic to it as well. We'll show you guys how to do that. So Stage 2, egg yolks. Stage 3, avocados. Stage 4, it kind of opens up into this plethora of juicing and all kinds of fun stuff.
Okay, here's a really dumb question though.
Hey, no such thing.
Well, I just pictured it. So the soup is what you eat mainly, and that's your staple.
Yep.
Right?
Mhm.
Even though you look at it, I look at it like it's a foods you can't eat. By the way, there's a list of foods you can and you can't, and ones to avoid, and eggplant is on the one that you can.
It's on the can list?
Yeah,
Okay.
can, and so it's-
So that's on the full GAPS diet.
Yeah. maybe,
Right.
but-
Right,
So right now it's just starting with just the soups. And then
right. We'll talk more about it. There's certain people that it's really important to start an introduction diet. Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, autism. There are other people that actually do very well starting with full GAPS diet. One, somebody coming off the standard American diet, they're eating McDonald's and convenience foods, and it's a huge change to them to begin with. Full GAPS diet, you get fruit, honey, I mean, it's a lot more choices. Constipation. Full GAPS diet's very good for people with chronic constipation. I almost would rather see the constipation get under control and get better before you go to the introduction diet. So that it depends on the situation, but you can do introduction diet and go through the stages, or you can start at full GAPS diet, kind of wrap your head around it, get it going. But to answer a part of your question, always the focus of the diet, always is going to be fats, bone broth soups, fermented foods, fermented vegetables, probiotics, minerals, the basics of the diet. Because people look at, oh, GAPS diet's great, I can do fruit and honey. If you eat 85% fruit and honey and 15% bone broth soups, you're going to be in big trouble. So even when you add the fruit and honey, it's a special treat. It's very small portions. It's because people who are doing this diet are compromised, and so you have to go slow with it. Does that answer everything?
Yeah, especially like for me, when we talk about, I have the yeast probably around, so the fruit after.
Right. Yep, the fruit would be something you'd introduce slowly and carefully, low sugar fruits first, and just kind of work your way through. Yep. And even at stage 5 in the GAPS diet, she recommends baked apples. So, and we'll go through that when we'll do some recipes and things like that. But the first one is peeled and like baked apples. They're basically pre-digested when you bake them. And that's how we're going to make baby food for Naomi. We're going to bake it and mush it up and freeze it. And so, yeah. Okay. Yes?
When you skim the top of your whatever broth,
Mhm.
not to eat fat, but what do you, how much is?
Particles, basically bones. Yeah, just various debris. Yeah, I mean, mostly bones. Because like we said, with the chickens, they can really start to disintegrate, and they can kind of break off in a lot of little pieces. So it's good to kind of get the majority of that out if you can. Again, not that it'd hurt you if it's crushed up, but yeah, it's mostly bones. Let me see if anybody asks any questions here. Oh yes, thank you, Janet. She said she would pressure can it. Okay, I have a question online. During the first stage of the GAPS diet, is bone broth the only food you are eating? Yes. The introduction first stage is bone broth soup only. 3 meals a day, 6 meals a day, every hour you have a cup of soup. It's only bone broth. Now, you can do some a little bit of sauerkraut juice. That's one of the recipes we're going to do for next week. Sauerkraut juice, and even yogurt, whey, and sour cream if you tolerate them. Sauerkraut juice, everybody should be fine with. Unless you have a really bad candida yeast issue, you might have a little gas, bloating, you might have a little die-off effect. But yeah, it's pretty much just the bone broth soups and maybe a couple small teaspoons of some fermented foods. And then I had one more question online. How do gut problems cause constipation and depression? Okay, so gut problems cause, let's look at constipation real quick. You have a colon, again, it can be a river of life or a river of toxicity. People have chronic backed up colons. When it's like a pipe in your house. What happens when it gets blocked up? It starts to back up, it's not pretty. So when your colon starts to get backed up because you haven't done any cleansing or colon cleansing or you've eaten a lot of foods that congest the colon, it can literally back up the lymphatic system, the liver, the kidneys, all the detoxification organs can get blocked. If your digestion's weak, you don't produce hydrochloric acid, you don't produce bile, which is used to digest your food. Without hydrochloric acid and bile, you can't have proper bowel movements. So if you eat a lot of sugar and processed foods that kind of block up digestion and you're not producing those stomach juices, those stomach acids, then you won't have what you need to form normal bowel movements, and that'll result in constipation. Depression, we'll talk about a lot next class. It kind of fits the whole profile gut and psychology syndrome. The gut, when it gets compromised, toxins start leaking out into the bloodstream. One of the places those toxins will deposit is the brain. So it's literally can be toxicity of the brain for autism and a lot of other issues. Another thing with depression is we know now, It's so fascinating what we've discovered in science. We know now that the majority of our neurotransmitters, especially our happy, feel-good neurotransmitters, are actually produced in the gut. So if you have a compromised gut, you're not producing serotonin. So we know dopamine, serotonin, a lot of these neurotransmitters that we need to feel a certain way, these hormones, actually also stem from the gut. So if you're not producing those hormones properly, that can result in depression. And again, we'll talk about that in a lot more detail, probably in the next class. You're welcome. Oh, are store-bought fermented foods okay? Another great question. Yes. I will caution you with the Asian market. There are some things I buy at the Asian market. Kimchi is not one of them. Kimchi, if you look at the Asian market, will normally have MSG and sugar, a lot of times corn syrup, a lot of questionable ingredients. There are things I buy at the Asian market. Fermented foods is not one of them. Ideally, of course, it's best to make your own. There are fermented food sections, usually in the refrigerated section of the grocery store. Bubby's is a brand we buy a lot. Bubby's pickles, Bubby's sauerkraut, Bubby's horseradish. There's kimchi you can buy at the grocery store. And these products are fine, especially, again, it's a lot. It can be overwhelming. You might be like, hey, I can do the bone broth soups, throw a bone in a pot and stick it on. I can handle that. But this whole making fermented veggies thing, that's a little much right now. I'm a little busy or whatever. Got to wrap your head around it. So it's okay. Buy some stuff at the store. Start using a little bit of that each day. Same thing, a couple teaspoons with each meal. Put it in your soup. Just start using it slowly and just buy the best quality you can. So yes, that's okay. The other source you can usually get it from is local farmers. I mean, our local farmer will sell us yogurt and kefir starters, for yogurt, water kefir. So that's another source, is your local farmer. And I'm telling you, this is going to get more and more and more and more popular. So you'll be able to start getting them from people. You'll start be able to get it in the grocery store on a much more regular basis as this movement towards like health and real food grows. So, any other questions out here in the audience?
You talked about sour cream. You're not talking about sour cream that you buy in the grocery store.
I'm not. You want to make sour cream by yourself, and that's a next week video? Yep, that's a next week video. We'll show you how to make sour cream. It's actually pretty easy. You take a quart of cream, and you're going to put a starter in it. But there's a couple of other little nuances, but you can make sour cream pretty easy.
Not the same thing as milk kefir. I mean, it's not the kefir starter.
Right. It's different. Yeah, it's different. Yep. So there is sour cream at the store. You're not going to get away around pasteurization by law. There are companies, I only know of one, it's called Kelowna. If you're elsewhere in the country, I don't know what you get, but grass-fed cows, no antibiotics, no hormones, they don't homogenize it. So their milk actually separates the way it's supposed to. And they have a sour cream. So if we can't get sour cream, if we can't get butter, if we can't get the things from our local farmer, we'll get the best we can at the grocery store. So, see if there's any other questions online. Okay, I don't see any other questions online. Does anybody else have any questions out here? No? Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. It's been fun, and I guess we'll see you next week. Don't forget your homework. Okay.